I'm very, very proud. She's been amazing. She's been through so much in the last couple of years, particularly.
For 30 years, they buried it. The causes Diana fought for, the networks she quietly built, the vision she had for what the monarchy could actually become. After Diana died, the institution moved fast. Faster than the grief, faster than the questions. Certain things disappeared, certain connections were severed, certain records went very quiet. Nobody was supposed to go looking, but someone did, and that someone is her son. Prince William has just done something the palace did not see coming. Something that reaches all the way back to his mother's most hidden work. And the investigation that triggered it has opened a door that cannot be closed again.
An amazing wife, and literally our family couldn't cope without her, so she's been absolutely stunning.
The investigation that started everything. There is a moment in every institution when the past stops being history, when it becomes evidence. That moment arrived for Buckingham Palace in the early weeks of 2026, and the person who forced it was not a journalist, not a foreign government, not a whistleblower leaking documents to the press. It was William, the same man who had spent years watching the institution protect itself at the expense of everything else. The same man who, as a 15-year-old boy, walked behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London while the world wept and the palace stayed silent. He had waited long enough.
Britain's former Prince Andrew has been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office.
The trigger was not what most people expected. When Prince Andrew was arrested in February 2026 on charges tied to the Jeffrey Epstein network, the palace erupted into crisis management mode. Phones ringing, staff scrambling, statements being drafted and torn up and drafted again. But William was not scrambling. He was already moving with a different purpose entirely.
Charles had stripped his brother of his titles back in October and has since evicted him from Windsor.
Because while everyone else was focused on Andrew, William had quietly commissioned something months earlier. An internal review, private, tightly controlled, known only to a small circle of trusted advisors and senior staff. The question that review was tasked with answering was this: what exactly happened to the work Diana was doing in the final years of her life? Not the public appearances, not the charity galas and the handshakes and the photographs. The deeper work, the networks she was quietly building, the causes she was personally funding through back channels, the institutional relationships she had cultivated with organizations the palace had never officially endorsed.
What do you feel your role is? What is your contribution?
I feel my role is...
What happened to all of it after she died? The answer, when it came back, shook people who thought they already knew everything. To understand why that question mattered so much, you have to understand what the palace looked like in the months after Diana's death in August 1997. The grief was global. That part everyone remembers. What fewer people discuss is what happened inside the institution during that period. Senior palace officials moved quickly, quietly, deliberately. Diana had been, in the eyes of the establishment, an unpredictable force. A woman who operated outside the official channels, who built her own relationships with governments, aid organizations, and advocacy groups without always seeking approval from above. The landmine campaign, the AIDS wards she visited when others refused, the back-channel conversations she was reportedly having with figures in the Middle East peace process in the final months of her life. And these were not sanctioned operations. They were Diana, acting alone, following her instincts, building something the palace had no control over.
Diana was unstable.
Instead of looking behind.
And after she died, that something was carefully, methodically dismantled. Contacts were not followed up. Partnerships quietly lapsed. Organizations that had been working closely with Diana found that the connection simply evaporated. No explanation, no transition, no handover of any kind. One source familiar with the review described it simply. It was as if someone had walked through every room she had ever worked in and turned off all the lights. Williams' team spent months retracing those steps. The review was forensic in its approach. Investigators spoke to surviving members of Diana's personal staff. They contacted organizations she had worked with directly. They pulled correspondence. They followed financial records connected to her personal charitable giving in the years before her death. What emerged was not a single dramatic smoking gun. It was something more unsettling than that. It was a pattern. Decision after decision, lapse after lapse. Each one individually explainable, each one individually deniable, but viewed together across the full timeline from 1997 onward, the picture was impossible to misread. Diana's work had not simply faded away after her death, it had been actively suppressed, and some of the people involved in that suppression were still embedded inside the institution, still drawing salaries, still attending meetings, still helping shape the official narrative of what the royal family stood for and what it did not. Here's the question that nobody inside the palace wanted to ask out loud. If Diana's legacy was buried deliberately, who gave the order? William does not have a complete answer to that yet.
An amazing wife, and literally our family couldn't cope without it, so she's been absolutely stunning.
The review was not able to assign individual responsibility with the kind of certainty that would hold up to public scrutiny. What it did establish was institutional culpability. The palace as a system made choices in the aftermath of Diana's death that served the institution's comfort rather than her memory. That finding landed hard. Charles was briefed on the review's conclusions. Sources say his response was subdued, not defensive, not dismissive, but quiet in a way that told the people in that room that the findings were not entirely a surprise to him. Camilla was not in that briefing. That detail matters more than it might seem. By the time Andrew's arrest broke publicly and the palace was consumed by that crisis, William had already decided what he was going to do with what his investigation had uncovered.
He will stand, kiss his father on the right cheek.
He was not going to sit on it. He was not going to file it away and wait for a more convenient moment. He was going to act quietly at first, then if necessary, very publicly indeed. The investigation had answered one question. What happened to Diana's work after she died? But it had opened another, one far bigger, far more dangerous for certain people inside that building. Could what she built actually be brought back? And if William tried, how hard would the institution push back? Stay with us, because what he did next, nobody saw coming. What Diana left behind.
I was crying out for help, but giving the wrong signals. And people were using my bulimia.
Most people think they know what Diana left behind. The images, the dresses, the footage of her kneeling beside sick children and holding the hands of strangers that no royal had ever touched before. They think her legacy is the emotion, the memory, the grief that swept the world in August 1997 and never fully disappeared. But that is the surface story. Underneath it, buried beneath 30 years of institutional silence, was something far more concrete, far more dangerous to the people who wanted her influence contained. Diana left behind a blueprint, and William's investigation just found it. To understand what was actually lost after Diana died, you have to go back to the last 2 years of her life.
My husband and I had to keep everything together because we didn't want to disappoint the public.
By 1996, Diana had been stripped of her HRH title following the divorce from Charles. The palace made clear she was no longer a working royal. No official support, no institutional backing, no staff provided by the crown. Most people assumed that would diminish her. It did the opposite. Free from the constraints of official royal protocol for the first time in her adult life, Diana moved faster and further than she ever had before. She did not need the palace's permission anymore. She did not need to clear her schedule with courtiers or submit her engagements for approval. She simply acted. The landmine campaign is the most documented example of what Diana could accomplish when the institution was not holding her back. In January 1997, she traveled to Angola with the international campaign to ban landmines. She walked through active minefields. She sat with amputees. She held children who had lost limbs to buried explosives that the major world powers had been too politically cautious to confront. The images were devastating, deliberately so. Within months, the Ottawa Treaty banning landmines was signed by 122 countries. The campaign's leader, Jody Williams, won the Nobel Peace Prize that same year. Diana did not win a prize. She was dead before the treaty was formally signed. But the people who worked alongside her on that campaign have stated repeatedly and clearly that her involvement changed the political calculations entirely. Her presence made it impossible for governments to keep looking away. That is the scale of what she was capable of. And that was just one campaign in the final year of her life.
And in a way, by being out in public, they supported me, although they weren't aware just how much.
What Williams' review uncovered went deeper than the public causes. Diana had been quietly building a network of direct relationships with humanitarian organizations that operated entirely outside royal channels, not the grand patronages, not the official charity appointments that came with a palace press release and a photo opportunity. Personal relationships, direct funding, private correspondence with leaders of organizations working in conflict zones, refugee communities, and HIV treatment programs across Africa and Southeast Asia. Some of those organizations received personal financial contributions from Diana in the final 18 months of her life, not through official charitable foundations directly, quietly, without any fanfare. And when she died, that funding stopped overnight. The organizations reached out, letters were sent to Kensington Palace, phone calls were made to her former staff. Nothing came back, not a response, not an acknowledgement, not a single word. One aid worker involved with a program Diana had been personally supporting described waiting for months for some kind of contact, some indication that her work would be continued or at minimum recognized. It never came. The silence, she said, felt like a second death.
But I was actually crying out because I wanted to get better in order to go forward and continue my duty.
Here's the question William's team kept returning to as the review progressed. Was Diana simply ahead of her time? Because when you map the causes she was quietly championing in 1996 and 1997 against the issues that dominate global humanitarian conversation today, the overlap is striking. Mental health. She spoke publicly about her own struggles at a time when the word itself was almost unspeakable in polite society. She visited psychiatric facilities. She advocated for destigmatization years before any government took it seriously. Not homelessness. She made unannounced visits to shelters in London, not organized visits, not managed appearances with advanced press teams. She would simply arrive, sit with people, listen, HIV and AIDS. While the palace distanced itself from the epidemic throughout the 1980s and early 90s, Diana was photographed shaking hands with AIDS patients without gloves at a time when the public still feared casual contact could spread the virus. That single image did more for public understanding of the disease than any government campaign that decade.
It was a couple working in the same job. We got out the same car, shook the same hand.
These were not accidents of empathy. They were strategic, deliberate, part of a larger vision Diana was building toward. A vision for what a royal could actually be, what the institution could stand for if it chose connection over distance. William grew up knowing fragments of this story. His mother talked to him. Not about everything. He was a child, but he absorbed more than the palace ever realized or ever wanted him to. He knew about the landmines. He knew about the hospital visits that never made the papers. He had been told, carefully and over time, about the phone calls she made to people the institution would never have approved of. What he did not know until the review was the full scale of what had been quietly dismantled after her death. Reading those findings as a grown man, as a father, as the future king of the institution that had buried his mother's work. Sources say he was not angry in the way people might expect. He was still, the kind of still that people who know William well say is far more significant than any outburst. Because when William goes still like that, it means a decision has already been made. The only question left is what he was going to do about it, and who was going to try to stop him. The palace's long silence.
But there again, I didn't have the choice.
So it wasn't at your request?
Nobody ordered a cover-up. That is the important thing to understand. Nobody sat in a room and drafted a memo that said suppress Diana's work. Nobody signed their name to a document ordering her networks to be dismantled. Nobody made a single dramatic decision that could be pointed to decades later as the moment everything went wrong. It was quieter than that, far more deliberate, far more deniable, and in many ways, far more damaging. Because what the palace did after Diana died was not a conspiracy, it was a culture. To understand how institutions bury things without ever officially burying them, you have to understand how the British royal household actually operates. It does not run on orders. Not primarily, it runs on signals. A senior courtier does not need to be told directly that a certain subject is off limits. They read the room. They observe which topics make the people above them uncomfortable. They notice which names stop being mentioned in meetings, which files stop being referenced, which phone calls stop being returned, and then they adjust accordingly. After Diana died in August 1997, the signals inside the palace were unmistakable. She had been a problem in life, an unpredictable, uncontrollable, emotionally devastating problem that split the royal family down the middle and dragged its most private failures into the most public spaces imaginable. The institution was not going to allow her to remain a problem in death.
When you say you were never given any credit, what do you mean?
The first signal came within weeks of the funeral. Diana's personal staff were quietly dispersed. Her private office at Kensington Palace was closed down. The people who had managed her schedule, her correspondence, her personal charitable relationships, the individuals who actually knew which organization she had been working with and what commitments she had made, were let go. Some were offered roles elsewhere within the royal household, roles that had nothing to do with Diana's work, roles that ensured their knowledge stayed private and their connections to her network were effectively severed. Others simply left with nothing. No transition plan, no handover process, no instruction to contact Diana's partners and explain what would happen next. One former member of Diana's staff, speaking years later, described the experience with quiet devastation. "We were cleared out faster than you would clear out an office after a redundancy. There was no ceremony, no acknowledgement of what we had been doing or why it mattered. We were just gone." The organizations Diana had been working with privately began reaching out almost immediately. They wanted to know about ongoing commitments, about funding conversations that had been in progress, about visits that had been planned, and programs that Diana had personally expressed interest in continuing. The palace did not respond with hostility. That is the important detail.
How did you cope with that?
Well, obviously there were lots of tears, and one could dive into the bulimia.
It responded with silent, not aggressive silence, not the silence of an institution that wanted a fight, the silence of an institution that had simply decided these relationships did not exist, that Diana's private network was not something the crown recognized or intended to honor. Phone calls went unreturned for weeks, then months. Letters received standard acknowledgement responses and nothing further. Requests for meetings were politely declined without explanation. Slowly, the organizations understood there will be no continuation. There would be no acknowledgement. Whatever Diana had been building privately, it had ended with her. Here's the question that Williams' review forced the palace to confront directly. Who made that call? Not the specific individuals. The culture, the institutional logic. Why did the palace choose silence over continuation?
And having maternity services here now and more social care. So really looking forward to see them. And
why, in the immediate aftermath of the most devastating public outpouring of grief the monarchy had ever witnessed, did the institution respond by quietly dismantling the very work that had made Diana so beloved? The answer, when you sit with it, is not actually surprising, it is just uncomfortable. Diana's work terrified the establishment precisely because it was effective, because it operated outside their control, because it demonstrated repeatedly and undeniably that a royal could build genuine human connection without the machinery of the institution behind them. And that was not a lesson the palace wanted amplified. If Diana's private network had been acknowledged and continued after her death, it would have raised an obvious question. Why hadn't the institution been doing this all along? Silence was easier. Silence protected the establishment from having to answer for 30 years of emotional distance. Silence allowed the narrative to shift from what Diana had been building to what Diana had been. A story, a memory, a tragedy, not a blueprint. The courtiers who managed that silence are not all gone. That is what made Williams' review so charged, so politically sensitive inside the palace. Some of the individuals whose decisions contributed to the burial of Diana's work are still embedded in the institution, still advising and still shaping how the royal family presents itself to the world, still occupying positions of quiet but real influence. Williams' team identified several of them. No names have been made public. The review was never intended to be a public document. It was an internal reckoning, not a prosecution. But sources confirm that William knows exactly who they are. And those individuals, according to people familiar with the situation, are now fully aware that he knows. The dynamic inside certain palace corridors has shifted noticeably in recent months. People who once operated with complete institutional confidence have become, by all accounts, considerably more careful. They should be. Charles was briefed on this part of the review too. His response reportedly went beyond the subdued reaction to the earlier findings. He asked questions. Specific questions about specific decisions made in the months after Diana's death. Questions that suggested he had always carried his own doubts about how the institution had handled her legacy. He did not express regret publicly. He is a king. Public regret is not a tool available to him in the way it might be for anyone else. But sources close to that briefing say the conversation lasted far longer than anyone had scheduled. And when it ended, Charles gave William something he had not formally given him before: full authority to proceed, not just with the investigation, with whatever came next. The palace's long silence was ending. The only question now was what William intended to say. William moves. There was no press conference, no dramatic announcement, no carefully staged moment designed for maximum media impact. That is not how William operates. When he finally moved on everything the investigation had uncovered, he did it the way he does most things that matter to him: quietly, deliberately, with absolute precision. And by the time the palace and the press fully understood what was happening, it was already done. The first move came in late January 2026. William formally reactivated the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund framework, not the original fund, which had been wound down in 2012 after distributing over £140 million to charitable causes. Something new, something built on the same foundation, but with a sharper, more deliberate focus. The announcement was made through a single brief statement from Kensington Palace. No fanfare, no extensive press briefing, just a statement confirming that the Prince and Princess of Wales would be establishing a new initiative to continue and expand the humanitarian work championed by Diana during her lifetime. The reaction inside certain circles of the palace was immediate, not public opposition. That would have been politically impossible. You cannot publicly oppose a son honoring his dead mother without looking monstrous. But privately, sources confirm there were conversations. Urgent, uncomfortable conversations between senior courtiers about what exactly William intended and how far he planned to take it. The answer, it turned out, was further than any of them had anticipated. The second move was more personal, and in many ways, more powerful. William reached out directly to several of the organizations Diana had been privately supporting in the final years of her life. The ones his review had identified. The ones that had sent unanswered letters to Kensington Palace in the weeks after her death in 1997. Some of those organizations still existed, some had evolved into different forms. Some had merged with larger bodies over the decades. But the people who remembered Diana, who had worked alongside her personally before everything went silent, were still there. William contacted them himself, not through intermediaries, not through a palace communications team managing optics and messaging, directly. Sources familiar with those conversations describe the reaction from the organizations as overwhelming. Decades of silence, broken by a single phone call from the man who had been a teenager when they last had contact with his mother. One humanitarian leader who received such a call described it simply. He did not make speeches. He did not talk about legacy or symbolism or what this meant for the monarchy. He asked what we needed. He asked what his mother had promised. And he said he intended to honor it. That as a sentence alone, he intended to honor it, carried more weight than 30 years of official royal charitable statements combined. But William was not finished. The third move was the one that sent the clearest signal to everyone watching inside the institution. He announced a formal review of all active royal patronages and charitable associations across the working members of the royal family. The stated purpose was modernization, alignment, ensuring that royal charitable work reflected genuine need rather than historical tradition. The real purpose was understood by everyone in the palace immediately. William was auditing what the institution stood for, and he was measuring it against what his mother had demonstrated it could stand for. Patronages that had existed for decades purely out of institutional inertia were put under scrutiny. Organizations that had royal association in name but little active royal engagement in practice were flagged for review. The question being asked of every single association was direct and uncomfortable. Is this making a real difference, or is it simply making the palace look good? Several long-standing patronages did not survive that question. They were quietly discontinued. Their royal associations ended without ceremony or explanation beyond the standard language about periodic reviews and evolving priorities. The courtiers who had maintained those relationships for years watched them dissolve and understood exactly what was being communicated. The era of performative royal charity was ending. Here's what made these moves so significant beyond their immediate impact. William was not just reclaiming Diana's specific causes, he was reclaiming her method. Diana's power had never come from her title. It had come from her willingness to be present, to show up without the protective machinery of the institution around her, to sit with people the establishment found inconvenient and treat them as if they mattered more than the optics of the moment. William understood that. He had understood it for years. But understanding something and having the authority to act on it are two different things. The investigation gave him the authority. Charles gave him the permission. And the Andrew crisis gave him the political cover to move, without the palace being able to push back without looking catastrophically tone-deaf. The timing was not accidental. William had waited for precisely this alignment of circumstances. Catherine was central to all of it. This is not William acting alone and Kate standing supportively in the background. Sources describe her as a full strategic partner in every decision. The reactivated fund framework was as much her architecture as his. The outreach to Diana's former humanitarian contacts was something she helped shape, and in several cases personally participated in. Her own experience in 2024, facing a cancer diagnosis publicly, navigating illness while the world watched, had deepened something in her that was already there. She understood viscerally now what Diana had understood instinctively, that the most powerful thing a royal can do is be human in public, not polished, not managed, not protected by layers of institutional distance. Human. That understanding now sat at the heart of everything William and Catherine were building together. The palace old guard watched all of this with a particular kind of dread. Not because William was doing anything wrong, because he was doing everything right. And because every move he made threw into sharper relief everything the institution had chosen not to do for the past 30 years. The silence that had protected them was ending. And the person ending it had his mother's instincts, his father's patience, and something neither of them had ever fully possessed. The investigation, the evidence, the authority to act on both. There was one more battle coming, the biggest one, and it was happening right now inside the walls of Buckingham Palace. What this means for the crown. There is a question the British monarchy has been avoiding for 30 years, not publicly. Publicly, they have managed the grief, honored the memory, and placed Diana's face on enough commemorative plaques and memorial gardens to fill a small city. But the real question, the one that cuts to the bone, was she right? Was Diana's vision of what the monarchy could be, what it should be, closer to the truth than everything the institution had spent decades defending? William's moves have made that question impossible to avoid any longer, and the crown will never be the same for it. Camilla?
She was the third person in the marriage. She needed to rehabilitate her.
Because her position in the story is more complicated and more precarious than most people have yet fully understood. Camilla has spent the years since her marriage to Charles in 2005 carefully and skillfully rehabilitating her public image. It was not easy work. The public association with Diana's pain ran deep. The hostility in certain quarters never fully disappeared, but she persisted. She was steady. She took on causes of genuine substance. Her work around literacy and domestic abuse has been consistent and credible. By the time Charles was crowned, most observers agreed she had earned her place. Then the Andrew crisis landed, and William started moving. And suddenly, Camilla found herself in a position nobody had planned for, standing between two eras. Her friendship with Sarah Ferguson is the fault line everyone is watching. William's position has not shifted. The monarchy cannot afford visible association with anyone connected to the Epstein network. Sarah Ferguson's name appears in released documents. The connection exists. In William's view, the only acceptable response is distance. Clean, visible, unambiguous distance. Camilla disagrees. She has maintained that a 50-year friendship cannot be erased because of what she considers guilt by association. That loyalty to a lifelong friend is not the same as endorsing the behavior of that friend's former husband. It is not an unreasonable position on a human level. On an institutional level, William considers it a liability the crown cannot carry. That disagreement is not resolved. It is sitting inside Buckingham Palace right now like an unexploded device. And here is what makes it so volatile. Diana's reclaimed legacy sits on the opposite end of the moral spectrum from everything the Epstein scandal represents. William is simultaneously reaching back to honor his mother's work with the vulnerable and the forgotten, while pushing forward to sever every visible connection to a network that exploited them. Those two things are not separate stories. They are the same story told from opposite ends. and Camilla's refusal to fully align with the second half is being read inside the palace as a failure to understand the first. Charles understands it. That is perhaps the most significant and least discussed development inside the palace in recent months. Charles gave William full authority to proceed. That was not a casual gesture. That was a king making a deliberate choice to prioritize the institution's future over the comfort of its present. Sources describe Charles as a man who was carrying an enormous amount in these months. The cancer, the Andrew crisis, the weight of a reign that arrived later than anyone expected and may prove shorter than anyone hoped. But also something else. Something that looks, to those who know him well, like a particular kind of peace. Charles spent decades in conflict with Diana's vision. Not always consciously, not always deliberately, but the marriage, the affair, the divorce, the years of competing narratives and public battles placed him on the opposite side of everything she represented in the public imagination.
Well, it gave everybody a wonderful new label. It's Diana's unstable.
Now his son is reclaiming her legacy, with Charles's blessing. Inside the institution Charles leads, there is a reconciliation happening there, not loudly, not with ceremony, but it is happening, and those closest to Charles suggest it matters to him more than he will ever say publicly. Now consider what Diana's reclaimed legacy actually means structurally for the crown going forward. It is not symbolic. That is the critical point. William is not lighting candles and hanging portraits. He is rewiring how the institution operates, what it prioritizes, who it serves, how it measures its own success. The new initiative, built on Diana's humanitarian framework, comes with accountability structures, measurable outcomes, public reporting on what is being done and whether it is working. That is revolutionary for a monarchy that has historically treated charitable work as a matter of dignified association rather than demonstrated impact. It signals something profound to every organization that will ever seek royal patronage going forward. Association with the crown will no longer be a prestige ornament. It will come with expectations, real ones. Harry is the presence in this story that nobody quite knows how to place. He is not involved in William's moves. He is not part of the investigation or the reclamation effort. He is living his separate life in California, publicly distanced from the institution in ways that have generated their own years of headlines. But Diana was his mother too, and the work William is now publicly honoring was work Harry also grew up knowing about, also absorbed, also carries. Sources suggest William has not reached out to Harry in connection with any of this. The relationship between the brothers remains what it has been for several years now. Distant, carefully managed, without warmth. Whether that changes as Diana's legacy moves from buried history to active institutional priorities is one of the most genuinely unpredictable elements of this entire story. Because Harry built his own post-royal identity significantly around Diana's memory, around being her son, around carrying her spirit outside the institution that he felt had failed her. If that institution is now, under William, actively reclaiming and honoring what she stood for, the question of where Harry fits becomes considerably more complicated. For him, most of all. Pull back and look at the full picture.
I felt compelled to perform. Well, when I say perform,
A palace investigation that most people never knew existed has uncovered 30 years of institutional suppression. A future king has used that investigation to reclaim his mother's buried work. A reigning monarch has given his blessing to a transformation that implicitly acknowledges the failures of his own era. A queen consort is resisting the new order and finding herself increasingly isolated. And a brother on the other side of the world is watching all of it unfold without a role to play in it. This is not a family drama dressed up in royal clothing. This is an institution deciding what it wants to be. Diana spent her life trying to show the monarchy what was possible if it chose connection over distance, humanity over protocol, impact over appearance. They buried that vision for 30 years. Her son just dug it back up, and this time nobody is powerful enough to bury it again. 30 years ago, they turned off the lights, they cleared out the offices, they let the phone calls go unanswered, they buried a blueprint that could have changed everything. They thought it was gone forever. They were wrong. William has done what nobody inside that institution believed was possible. He went looking for what his mother left behind. He found it, and now he is building with it. Diana never got to finish what she started. Her son just picked it up. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think William will succeed where the palace once failed? We will see you in the next one.